Well, what is this business of your health, your choice? There are some things that we can actually do in terms of our diet. We can make decisions. We want to do this, do that, exclude this, exclude that. But not only our diet, our overall lifestyle. And I'm going to include some things that generally are very popular in the world today. You know, we think that this human being, this very delicate creature, can take abuse till it comes out of its ears. And really, I don't believe that that is the case. We might be fearfully and wonderfully made, but the fact of the matter is that doesn't give us any right to abuse our bodies and to pump things into it which on the long run will do harm to it or impair our cognitive function. What are the health risks affecting our health? Well, even the scientists are saying better definition of risks will enable people to make rational be more rational about the way they live their lives. So there is something we can do. There is something that we can decide on how we want to live and what we want to do. But nevertheless, many of our lifestyles are full of monsters. And we can actually get rid of these monsters in our lifestyles and in our diets. Some of them we can't do anything about. For example, New Scientist carried this article, Smog Blights Babies in the Womb. Now, that might be so. But you know, you have to live and you have to work. And there are some things that you cannot do much about. You could perhaps move out of the cities. You could perhaps move to areas of high relief. You could do all kinds of things like that. But if it's financially not tenable, then you have to do the best you can on the other issues. Mankind is prone to take so many compounds into his system that harm him. For example, stimulants like caffeine, coffee, tea, cola drinks, nicotine, even cocaine or amphetamines and all those sort of things. What they do is they increase your state of arousal. So because we wake up thinking, a train's gone over me, we have to take something to increase that arousal. And then sometimes we get so hyper that we have to take a depressant. So alcohol, narcotics, benzopyrines, barbiturates, all those things, even cannabis, dacha, whatever you want to call it, hash, grass, whatever, that decreases your alertness and slows down your body activity. So we either do something to increase it or we do something to calm down. You come home, you're so hyped up, I got to drink something to calm down, down the hatch it goes. Then people, when they get whipped up to a further frenzy of excitement, then they need something a little bit more potent. So they go for hallucinogens, LSD, ecstasy, and you name them. Cannabis in high doses. And that distorts the mind and the mood so that you can just switch off and say, I want nothing to do with society or the world around me. And if you're very poverty struck, then inhalants can even do the job, petrol, glue, thinners, which also affect the senses. And you know, this is not even a joke. This is our society today. We run from one stimulant to the depressant, to the hallucinogens, to whatever it takes to either escape reality or to cope with reality. But then there's something which is a lot more subtle, which we don't often realize. This is also an article summarizing the latest findings, also from New Scientist. How many patients are killed by their cures? Wow, that's a good question. It says over there, adverse reactions to drugs may be one of the leading causes of death in Western countries. Now, these are prescription drugs. This is what actually happens in the world. And it says over here, in other countries besides the United States, where this is very, very prevalent, but let's take a country like the UK. No one knows the scale of the problem in Britain, but they estimate that 70,000 deaths are caused annually by prescription drugs. That means that prescription drugs are only behind heart attacks and stroke as a cause of death. That means it's one of the biggest killers in the Western world. Doesn't that make you think? Doesn't it make you think that the drugs that we take are killing people and that it is the biggest killer after strokes and heart attacks? That is phenomenal. We are so drugged up, we have so many preservatives and things in our bodies that our whole physiology has changed. You know, in Japan, if they dig a grave for you, being a place where there isn't a lot of space, you have a lease on that grave. You don't own it. And after 5 years, out you go. You go into a smaller box and you get deposited and somebody else gets the lease. You get me? Well, with the adoption of a Western-style diet and all the preservatives and things in the food, whereas in the past, if they dug up that grave and everything had decayed down to nothing, now they open it up and the guy's still smiling at them. So they cover it up and they wait another 5 years, and that doesn't wipe the grin off his face. We are thoroughly preserved. Question, is that healthy or is that not so healthy? I think it is time we reassess even what we do to our bodies in terms of medicinal drugs. Now, I'm not saying, and I'm not a proponent of one who says if you are really in trouble, you take nothing. And if the medical world can intervene and help and save a life, well, that's it. If my child is on the point of death and an antibiotic can save him, I'll give him that antibiotic. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of things we can do where we don't really have to go the whole way. There are emergencies, yes, but we can switch to much healthier alternatives. We can switch to herbs and a healthy lifestyle and prevention rather than cure. And a lot of the things we take, well, we can dump them. The association between what we eat and disease is also becoming far more prevalent today. We know that fat, for example, is very positively correlated to a number of cancers: breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. Those two in particular, highly correlated to fat consumption. Then your body weight plays a role. Endometrial cancer, breast cancer is associated with your body mass. Fruits and vegetables have a negative impact on cancer. In other words, they have compounds which suppress cancer. There are secondary compounds in fruits and vegetables which assist your body to eliminate the problems which lead to these degenerative diseases, and we'll deal with them later. Alcohol, well, some of them very positively correlated, like esophageal cancer, mouth cancer, but even to an extent, breast cancer and rectal cancer, and particularly the oral cavity. And then smoked and pickled foods are associated with stomach cancer and esophageal cancer. So we see that we can make a decision that we do not want to partake in smoked foods to the extent that people do. We can cut out alcohol. We can increase the consumption of fruit and vegetables. We can watch our body weight. And we can do something about the fat consumption that we have. Take alcohol, for example. In the past, they used to say, well, a little bit of alcohol is good for you, good for your heart. Well, maybe so. Maybe you do have a slightly lower risk for heart attacks, and even that is questionable these days. But we also know that the impact on natural killer cells has been highly underestimated. And they did human studies where they used small amounts of alcohol, less than a glass of wine per consumption, and a small amount of alcohol used in the human study was capable of impairing the cytotoxic capacity of these blood cells, therefore reducing the immune system's ability to clear virus-infected cells or cells that have undergone neoplastic transformation. That means that they tend to become carcinogenic or tumor-producing. In women particularly, even a smaller quantity of alcohol can lead to cirrhosis. Even 1 or 2 glasses of wine a day can be problematic. And of course, if a pregnant woman drinks alcohol, then the risk of alcohol syndrome in babies or children increases. Normally, it has sort of a smallish head circumference, lower nasal bridge, eye folds, short nose, small mid-face, thin upper lip, and typical fetal alcohol syndrome is what you can see over here. You know, if you watch television and you watch a general school situation, you will be surprised how many little kids you can pick up watching television. Your eye becomes attuned to this. It's horrendous. You think, what is mankind doing to themselves? Are they crazy? Well, this comes from a medical source. Fetal alcohol syndrome. Some children whose mothers drank alcohol during pregnancy have characteristic flat faces. They are strikingly similar in the different races. Women who drink excessively while pregnant have a 30 to 45% chance of having a child who is affected to some degree. And notice 2 mixed drinks per day seems to be the level at which damage occurs. This is not a massive amount of alcohol. This is just a little bit of alcohol. So we can make choices in our lives. We can decide not to partake in drinking alcohol. We can make that choice and stick to it. Cigarette smoking, well, everybody knows that, but I want to tell you something new about cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking per day and the incidence of cancer, we know that that is exponentially correlated. The more you smoke, the worse it is. And let's say, for example, what is the probability of you reaching the ripe old age of 80? Well, if you have never smoked and let's say the age of 80, what is the probability of reaching it? If you have never smoked, there's 80. The probability of reaching it is 55%, which is not bad. Whereas if you smoke 25 a day, the probability of reaching 80 is only about 20%. That's quite a massive difference. No wonder that even the legislative powers are beginning to act against the tobacco companies, but they don't care. They'll just go to another country and destroy that country's health. World lung cancer, you will see that it is the industrialized countries of the world that are mostly affected, but this is shifting, and soon the third world countries will be most effective. Then if we look at the incidence of lung cancer in the USA, we see that the men started off very poorly in 1950s already, and this level has been really increasing to the 90s and has reached really unprecedented proportions. It seems the women are not quite as dumb as the men. They had lower levels, but as time progresses, they're also getting somewhat cognitively impaired because more and more women are smoking, and so lung cancer rates are increasing. And we find tumors in the lungs, even to this extent. There's a smoker's lung versus a normal, just city pollution lung. But let me show you something very interesting. We have a section in our university where we do research on the effect of nicotine on neonatals after birth. And what happens if the mother smokes? And this is a very fascinating study. This is a colleague of mine, Professor Moritz, is in the physiology department, and he's world famous for his research on nicotine. And here he had 3 groups of rats. And the one group was the control group. It didn't get any nicotine. Then the mothers received nicotine, and then the mothers were taken away from the nicotine. And then they had a look at the influence of the maternal nicotine exposure on the carbohydrate metabolism of the little baby's lungs that were born from these rats. And very interesting, if they were controls, that was their glucose metabolism, sort of average, about 60-something odd micromoles per gram per hour. If they had nicotine, look how quickly they utilized glucose. In other words, if a smoker smokes and has nicotine intake, that increases his glucose turnover and he tends not to become fat. Does that make sense? If you take away the nicotine, whammo, down comes the glucose metabolism, even lower than normal. That means that that individual would tend to become fat. In other words, people who stop smoking normally go back to smoking because they say it makes them fat. Is that a very good reason for smoking? Well, let's have a look at this. Here the mothers received 1 milligram per kilogram of body mass nicotine per day. This is now given to the mother that is pregnant. And then she receives this nicotine dose until day 21 after birth. That means that the little pups that are born are developing in the mother that is the equivalent of a smoker. Of course, not smoking, but getting the nicotine, just the nicotine. And while they are suckling up to day 21, then they are weaned, they are also receiving this nicotine dose. And here is the story. The control group is the dark one, and the group receiving the nicotine is the purple one. And if you look at the alveolar volume, that's the volume of the little air sacs in the lung, you will find that the group receiving nicotine after birth, it's exactly the same at birth as the group not receiving nicotine, and then it increases. So the air sacs get bigger in the group that has nicotine, whereas the air sacs, as the little pups develop, actually get smaller in the group that does not get nicotine. Very interesting. So the little air sacs in the lung are bigger in the babies where the mother was exposed to nicotine. Not only that, the number of air sacs, the number of alveoli. Here again, you have the control group, which is this group over here, and the nicotine group, which is the bottom one. And you will find that the group that did not get nicotine got more and more and more air sacs. So the group that did not have nicotine had small air sacs and lots of them. But the group that got nicotine had large air sacs and less of them. Can you see that? All right. Not only that, let me show you this for example. This is now a group receiving nicotine, and these are the air sacs. You can see this is relatively large. This is an electron micrograph. Relatively large little sacs over here. And what is more, you can see little tears over there. So the little air sacs are large, and they are torn, and some of the blood vessels are torn, and these lungs have constant little leakages of blood in them. Now let me show you, by the way, that little thing over there is a size marker. So if we put that into there, you'll see it only take a small amount of space. This over here is of the little babies where the mother did not get nicotine. And look at the air sacs. You can see that they're all about the size of that little thing there in the middle, which is the marker. So they're all tiny little air sacs, lots of them. So lots of little air sacs, healthy. The epithelium is not porous, nothing like that. Then it did the following. Took that lung and dissolved all the tissue. This is now of the babies. They never smoked, just the mother got it. Dissolve all the tissues so that only the elastic fiber remains. And this is what it looked like from a little rat where the mother never received nicotine. Can you see all that elastic fiber there? Lots of it. Whereas the group that received the nicotine, look at that, hardly any. In other words, those little rats are born with large air sacs, perforated air sacs, and hardly any elastic tissue. That lung is a floppy affair and is the perfect candidate for emphyseme. Now, it doesn't mean that that little one, although it never smokes or needs to smoke, gets emphyseme. Now, let's transfer this to the human. If the mother smokes during pregnancy, the baby inherits a lung like that. And let's say that child in its life never smokes. But by the time it gets to 45 or 50 or 60, suddenly they get emphyseme and they cannot understand it because they never smoked. But what they inherited was a lung like that. So you see, smoking is not only something that affects you, it affects your offspring. Therefore, one should be very careful as to the choices one makes. Let's talk about tea and coffee. Oops. Let me tell you something about plants. Amazing things. Plants have what we call secondary plant compounds. Some of them are good. Some of these compounds are anti-carcinogenic. But there are compounds in plants which are for defense. Two levels of defense. Toxic defense and digestibility reducing defense. Big story in the evolution creation scenario, by the way. So they say plants concentrate these compounds to prevent animals from eating them. Does that make sense? And some of them are toxic and some of them reduce digestibility, make the animal uncomfortable because it doesn't digest properly. And these compounds can be alcohols, pyrethrins, retinoids. These are things like retinoids are used as to induce paralysis when you want to paralyze an organism. Pyrethrins, as you know, are compounds that will kill insects. Tannins are compounds that are astringent, not digestibility reducing. Caffeine is an alkaloid. Theophylline is a compound in tea. Theobromine down there is a compound you find in cocoa products. Nicotine, for example. Now, the interesting thing is that different animals have different capacities to cope with this. If you take that nicotine there at the bottom, the tobacco plant has high levels of nicotine, which means no sensible animal that cannot cope with nicotine will eat that plant. But the tobacco hornworm has an enzyme that eliminates nicotine, so he's attracted to the nicotine and he eats that plant. Does that make sense? And when he eats it, he just excretes the nicotine and it's not harmful to him. Another animal eats that same plant, it is harmful for him, so he avoids it. Let's take tannin, for example. Very interesting story. Take the acacia tree in Africa. It is rich in tannin. Now, normally the leaves have a relatively low level of tannin, but the young leaves have high levels of tannin. Now, let's say a grazer comes along, an antelope like the eland, for example, and he's eating the acacia tree. When he bites a young bud, he gets high tannin and he goes, ugh. That protects the tree so that when it grows and puts out new shoots, that something doesn't come along and eats that. So it allows the plant to grow. So the eland will only eat leaves that don't have the high tannin. It'll eat the low tannin leaves, the other leaves. Are you with me? Then as he eats, the plant, as those leaves are broken, a pheromone is released, and the plant responds to this pheromone by increasing the level of tannin in the plant. But because it's a pheromone, it travels to the tree next door, and the tree next door, and the tree next door, and all the trees where those animals are grazing start increasing their tannin levels until it gets to a point where that tree is no longer palatable to that eland. And he stops eating, and he walks about 100 meters, and he'll start grazing again. What does that do? It prevents overgrazing in an area. And the tree is protected in terms of its growth so that its young shoots are not removed. And that is a defense system. The other interesting thing is that different plants have different compounds. And so different animals are attracted to different plants. You get specialized feeders, like, for example, the koala bear. It is only attracted to plants that have the oils of the eucalyptus tree in it, which is toxic to other animals. So no other animal eats it, but the koala bear only eats that. Are you with me? Now, I believe that that is a beautiful creation model, because if it weren't like that, all animals would perhaps eat one kind of plant. Imagine if every animal on this planet only ate lettuce. There would be no lettuce around, and that would be it. But now you have all these varieties, and you have the different animals that are all attracted to different plants. And to protect the plants, you have these mechanisms. And no animal will eat something that is toxic to its system. It will stick to its normal diet. If that diet is no longer available, the animal can be forced to eat something else, but it doesn't prefer it. And when the conditions return, it will eat what it normally eats. Like a springbok, for example, is attracted to the compounds in grasses. So they are not browsers. They don't like the tannin in the low levels of tannin. They don't browse. If there's a fire and the fields are burnt, they will eat what the browser eats to survive. But it's not their normal diet. So animals are very sharp as to what they eat, how much they eat, and what parts of a plant they eat. Caffeine and theobromine increase fatty acid concentration, blood pressure, stomach acid, adrenaline reaction, noradrenaline, a digestion and absorption time. Caffeine causes the release of cortisone, which in turn releases glycogen, causes a surge, and causes hypoglycemia. That's why you get a kick from the surge, and then a hypoglycemia. We've dealt with it. The insulin levels go up, down goes it, and you feel, so you need another cup. And you go through your life. Caffeine is toxic. It interferes with muscle action. It is an enzyme suppressant. It is a carcinogen. 500 grams of tea contains enough caffeine to kill 1,000 mice. And caffeine destroys vitamin B, and it is mutagenic. These are facts that are published in the literature, but are very often suppressed. Now, tetragenicity, more than one digit. Well, you can't prove, because the experiments aren't done, that this sort of thing is caused by caffeine in humans, but we know that caffeine causes tetragenicity in rats. So if you give rats caffeine, they have either that syndrome, they have multiple digits, or they develop split palates, or they develop exencephaly, the brain developing outside the head. And those are things that are induced, that caffeine induces in rats. Now, the experiments obviously haven't been done on humans, so this is not generally publicized, and you don't hear about it in the literature. Now, tea and coffee contain these alkaloids, caffeine, and you can see that theobromine in cocoa is very similar, and theophylline in tea is also similar. Let me just run you through this process. Just think about this. Here is a tea plantation in Africa. You will find similar ones in Ceylon. And this is just the greatest thing on the planet. Have you noticed that? And whole areas are inundated with these plants. And the pickers go out, and to make the best tea, you pick the 2 top leaves and the bud. Have you noticed that? The best of Ceylon is the 2 top leaves and the bud. Why? Well, that's ephemeral tissue. That's the young tissue, the new growth. So what will it have? It will have the highest level of tannins and caffeols and caffeines and all these theophylines and compounds in it. Now, any sensible animal would avoid that like the plague. Not man. Oh no. But more than that, before they actually go to harvest, they induce something. They go through the tea plantations with long sticks, and traditionally they go shwip, 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 and they whack off parts of this growth. Have you noticed that they do that? That is what they traditionally do, and then they wait for this new growth to appear, and they take the two top leaves and the bud. What does the whacking do? It stimulates, or simulates if you like, the grazing process, so it increases the level of these compounds. Normally that would keep animals away, but now they have in their possession the portion that has the highest level of these compounds. Then they cut off the surrounding forests, make huge fires, destroy the environment, because that makes the best tea, you see, and they dry this under the smoke fire. And then you sit with green tea, which has levels of caffeine and things in it, lower than black tea, but still has them in them. So green tea might be healthy in terms of the fact that it has some good components in it, but it also contains some caffeine, so it's not a really good idea. You can get the other compounds that are supposedly good for you from vegetables and fruits. You don't have to get it from green tea. Then what do? There's not enough caffeine in there for them. So they put it into huge vats and they ferment it. Now the bacteria break down and utilize everything that is usable. Everything that is usable, and after that process they again burn down the forest and make fires so that they can heat it up, add benzopyrines and all kinds of toxins added to it, and then when they've dried it, there's nothing in it except what the bacteria couldn't utilize. It's unadulterated, pure black poison. And then they feed it to the human being. And because it tastes vile and disgusting and bitter, you have to do one of two things. You either make it palatable by adding something fatty to it, like milk, or sugar to sweeten it up, or if you are hardened, then you can start appreciating it as a culture. So you learn to drink the tea with only two fingers and the other one raised, and you go sip, and then you say, ah, when actually you really want to say, have you noticed that? Now there's no creature on this planet that is as stupid as man, because no other animal would do what man does to get these compounds into that condition. So it's not a wise idea to follow an example of this creature called man. Rather follow the example of animals. There's a lot of hidden caffeine in lots of sources. For example, various kinds of coffee, tea. Tea has generally per cup less, but per gram tea more. So that is a good reason why you can't just have one cup. You must have more than one cup, you see, so that you don't run short. Cocoa products, even chocolates and things, have relatively high levels. And of course, many medications come with caffeine. They even put caffeine into your vitamins so that you can feel a kick, because vitamins won't give you a kick. So they add them in there so that you can feel a kick. So be careful what you do. And there's one other point. If you are an adult, you can eliminate caffeine out of your system reasonably quickly. If you are a child, it can take much longer. Where it could take you 3, 4, 5 hours, it could take a child 8, 10, 20 hours to eliminate it. And an unborn child will take up to 72 hours to eliminate caffeine, because the capacity to do it is very, very small. So we are doing a lot of damage to our children if we permit them to take drinks that are high in caffeine. Like, for example, cola drinks contain caffeine. And a small child has a small body weight, water volume ratio. In other words, it'll affect him much more, and his elimination rate is much slower than an adult's. So it's not a good idea to allow kids to have this type of thing. Let's talk more about, so we've seen that we can cut out on some things like smoking and also have good results for the offspring. We can look at the consequences of drinking drinks that are high in caffeine and theobromine and substances like that. And by the way, what is the favorite drink just before bedtime? Something like, well, some drink with milk, sugar, and let's say some cocoa containing product. If I don't want to use brand names, but let's change them a little, Blilo or something like that. You know what I mean? Or Bloveltine. That's what you will have just before bedtime, right? Now the combination milk sugar increases your fat component, increases the level of triglycerides in the blood. It's the perfect recipe for going to sleep permanently while you're sleeping. No wonder most people die in their sleep. Let's have a look at what we do to the fats that we consume. Well, women tend to say that they can be less careful than men because they are not as affected by coronary heart disease as men. More men die of heart attacks than women. But note this. This is a study from 31 October 1998. While women are less likely to suffer heart attacks than men, once a woman suffers her first heart attack, she is 70% more likely to die from it than a man. So in other words, women might get less heart attacks, but when they get it, it's much worse than when a man gets it. So be careful of what we consume and how we consume it. If you look at the cardiovascular disease statistics of the United States, 58.8 million Americans have one or more form of cardiovascular disease. That's a pretty horrendous statistic. 50 million have high blood pressure. 12 million have coronary heart disease, myocardial infarct, 7 million, angina, 6.2 million, stroke, 4.4 million, rheumatic fever and heart disease, 1.8 million. You add all that up, that's a pretty poor statistic. Would you agree? This is from the American Heart Association. If we look at cholesterol, 98.1 million American adults have a total cholesterol value of 200 milligrams per deciliter and higher. That is way too high. Their diet is obviously at fault. And if you look at young kids, average 19-year-old American has a mean cholesterol of 165 milligrams per deciliter, much higher than in any other country, except perhaps Finland and the Netherlands, where they have very high dairy products in their diets. This is the typical USA, South Africa diet. You have lots of barbecued, you have lots of things which are refined and which have high fat contents, cheeses, donuts and pizzas and things like that, and then you add the cola drinks to the side, and you've got the full catastrophe. You can't get better than that. Cholesterol content of food, excuse me, only animal products have cholesterol. But you know what's interesting? If you look at foods that the Bible classifies as unclean, you will see that they have very high cholesterol levels, like mussels and oysters and rock lobsters and roe and all these funny looking things. Very high cholesterol levels. Eggs, of course, high in cholesterol, but the protein is more of a problem than the actual cholesterol itself. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Washington, D.C., quotes JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, saying that dairy products contribute greatly to cholesterol and other problems, of course, and that cholesterol problems from avocado and coconut is a myth. There is no cholesterol in avocado, and there's no cholesterol in coconut. And although coconut is a saturated fat, somehow it doesn't induce the bad type of cholesterol, but actually favors the good type of cholesterol, HDL, which Avocado also does. So the ratio bad to good cholesterol is actually improved by these compounds. Strange how plants work. It's amazing. Cholesterol, as you know, accumulates within the blood vessels and causes plaque deposition, which can clog the blood vessels like this. And when it becomes dislodged, a clot that can form as a result, then you call it an embolus. And when it gets stuck in your brain, then it can cause an infarct, or in your heart, a cardiac infarct, or a coronary one, or a stroke. And there are certain things that you can watch. Your blood pressure. If your blood pressure is high, that increases your risk 2.2 times. If you smoke, 1.9 times. High cholesterol, 1.7 times. You add all that up together, and you get to 8.5, which is more than all that additive. But one interesting thing, black people, no matter where they are, whether they are African Americans or whether they are Africans, they have a much higher risk of having heart attacks from high cholesterol levels than whites. For some strange reason, that is just one of the facts. They have double the risk of whites. And now let me tell you something interesting. The heart foundations of the world were preaching in the last decades that the problem with heart disease comes from saturated fat. Is that right? So they say, cut down on your saturated animal fats, and that will improve your heart condition. So they encouraged a shift away from saturated to unsaturated fats. And, well, it paid off. Look here, since the 1970s to the 1990s, in the United States and in the UK, down came heart attacks. There was a tremendous drop in heart disease as a consequence of the shift in diet. So that's really encouraged the industry to advertise like crazy that saturated fats were bad for your heart and you should change. Of course, countries like Japan that never had high levels of saturated fats, there wasn't a dent and no change over this time period. But for the Westerner, it did a great job. So what did they switch to? They said, get away from the animal fat and get away from butter and switch to what? Switch to margarine. Let's talk about fats and cancer. Same time period. Here since the 70s to the 90s, what happened to cancer rates? They increased exponentially. Let me just go back for you. You see what happened to heart rate, heart attacks, and heart disease? Down it went in this time period from the 70s down to the 90s. But when it came to cancer, up it went. Why? You know, people always ask me, what is better, butter or margarine? And I always answer, depends which way you want to die. Now that might sound somewhat facetious, but there is merit in it. Let me show you why. Remember that fat is associated, and fat consumption as well, with breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, rectal cancer. And if we look at the world overall cancer sites, you will see that countries like Denmark, Scotland, Hungary, England, Wales, all the Western countries and all the high fat consuming countries, particularly animal fat, of course, are involved. Now, we've known since the late 80s already that diet has a very profound impact on cancer. And one of the first publications in this regard was in the late 80s. It was in Scientific American, Dietary Fat Intake and Deaths from Breast Cancer. And you can see that countries with a low fat intake like Thailand and Sri Lanka and those countries which have largely vegetarian diets, you can see that as you go up in fat consumption, so the incidence of cancer increases. I mean, the correlation is just phenomenal. Then they did the classic experiments where they inject a carcinogen and put rats on a high-fat diet and a low-fat diet. And you can see that on the high-fat diet, the incidence of breast tumors is much higher than on the low-fat diet. So they knew that fat in the diet is a carcinogen. Danger in the diet, fat intake per nation, and the major ones are breast cancer and colon cancer, pancreas cancer, prostate cancer are the major ones caused by fat intake. World breast cancer and prostate cancer rates, again you will see that countries like the European countries and Poland and the dairy countries are very high on the list of breast cancer. And if you go to prostate cancer, Switzerland, number one, the biggest dairy country in the world. Norway is just as high in dairy consumption, very high prostate cancer rates. And then as you go down the list, lower and lower prostate cancer rates. And very interesting, watch this. If you look at, let's say, prostate cancer in white males in the USA, you will see that the incidence is 23.6%, but go to black males and it's more than double. Now, this is something that really interests me, because in Africa, in my country, we are switching the diet of a whole nation from a traditional African diet to a Western diet where dairy products and other products are going to replace what they traditionally ate. And I am predicting in my country that we are going to see an increase in disease like you have never seen, and it is already taking place. And I'm going so far as to go onto national television in my country and accuse various organizations of murdering a whole race. I'm not very popular in some circles. Breast cancer and prostate cancer are great, great killers in the world today. Women that are apple-shaped, in other words, tend to be roundish up here, have 3 times the risk of women who tend to have their fat down here. So, you know, you can just look into a mirror and determine what your risk factor is as far as that is concerned. And I know life's not fair, but it does help you that if you have a certain body shape, you can decide, well, I'd rather be careful what I eat. Colon and rectal cancer, you'll see the same trends. Countries high in fat. Now, what about messing with fat? Let's just talk about what we really do to fat. This is saturated fat. We've spoken about this before, rather compact. And unsaturated fat has a rather loose composition, which means that this type of fat is more subject to oxidation. Now, question. Those of you who are older, do you remember in your childhood something like fats going and oils going rancid? Do you remember that? Those of you who are older. Yes. Fats going rancid. Even oils going rancid. Sunflower seed going rancid. Today, do they still go rancid? No, because the marketplace has done something to these fats. Now, fats are subject to a process which is called peroxidation. And a polyunsaturated fat, which is one that has double bonds like sunflower seed oil and oils like that, they are relatively unstable, and they form, when they oxidize, something called a free radical. It's a charged component, and it is associated with cancer and aging and liver disorders and arteriosclerosis and all kinds of diseases. So a balance between polyunsaturates and antioxidants must exist. So in each plant, in each seed, when there is a polyunsaturated fat, then there is an antioxidant together with that fat. So you will find tocopherols, the vitamin E group, present in those seeds, which prevent this from taking place. When you extract that oil, you have a problem. Because let's say your normal vitamin E requirement is 10 milligrams per day. When you eat free fat, let's say you use margarine on your bread, then you need 200 times that amount. And nobody ever gets that. The products formed when fats peroxidize as peroxides, aldehydes, ketones, hydroxyperides, polymers, cyclic monomers, you name it. And of course, chemistry works that way. If you heat something, you speed up the process. So now, if you heat saturated and polyunsaturated fats to 170 degrees for 2 hours, and you take that fat and you feed it to rats, then they get liver ailments, also cardiovascular lesions. All fats heated to 180 degrees centigrade for 2 or more hours produce serious liver ailments. Now, when they extract oils, let's say sunflower oil, sunflower seed oil, how do they extract it? They heat extract it. At what temperature? Above 200 degrees centigrade, sometimes 220 degrees centigrade. And the extraction process can take sometimes 2 hours, no problem. So by the time you buy it, it's already in this category. Am I right? Now you take it home, or the fast food company buys it, the oil, and they're going to make fries for you. How long do they have their oil in a heated state? Well, they just use it once, then they throw it away, right? Oh, no. Okay. So it can stay there for hours and hours and sometimes days. And if you go to that very special little corner cafe, it can stay there until it's black. Then they pour it into a bottle and sell it to the underprivileged, pure 100% carcinogen, cheap, half price. Isn't that disgusting? So what we are doing to ourselves is really highly problematic. Now, triunsaturated fatty acid will undergo auto-oxidation 10,000 times faster than a monounsaturated fatty acid. So let's take an oil like olive oil, which is a mono oil. It doesn't oxidize very rapidly, and then it will produce the lowest levels. Whereas one that is a polyunsaturated that's this one over here, will be the fastest, and a saturated one will also oxidize because it has no antioxidants. Animal fat has no antioxidants. So when you heat it, it has the same process. Now, the two fats that we really need in our diet, because they're essential fatty acids, are linoleic acid and linolenic acid. Can you see that they are polyunsaturated fats? They have these double bonds in them. So when we heat those, they become carcinogens. Now, polyunsaturates, therefore, tend to be problem children and to cause cancer. But they do more to it. When they want to make a margarine, they use plant oils, but plant oils tend to be liquids. You don't want to pour your margarine on your bread, do you? You want to smear it on your bread. So, in order to do that, they use a process called hydrogenation. They change the chemistry of the compound. By the way, in U.S. News Release number HEWB35, it is a violation of the law to make any claim that polyunsaturates can prevent or treat heart disease. That's not a law in my country. So in my country, they have these adverts of, my husband is a bloro man and he never gets heart disease because he uses margarine. If you look at the ingredients of margarine, well, it's oils, largely, of course, sunflower seed oil and other oils. Then they add preservatives, sodium benzoate, casein very often, which is the protein in milk, carotenoids and things like that. Then they remove the fat-insoluble gums, they neutralize it with caustic soda, they bleach it, filter it, dehydrogenate it, and then they hydrogenate it. And then they go through the same process again. And when you hydrogenate something, you change the structure from the normal cis form to the trans form. In other words, the normal molecule looks like this. The two arms of the molecule are on the same side of the double bond like that, and we say that is the cis form. In South Africa, we've got two rivers or two areas. The one is called Cis-Chi and the other one is called Trans-Chi. Cis means this side of the Chi River, and Trans-Chi means other side of the Chi River. So it's always nice to explain it that way. Same side, cis, opposite sides, trans. Now, biological systems can only use the cis form. We cannot use the trans form. But the trans form happens to be a solid, whereas the cis form happens to be a liquid. So if you have high levels of the trans form, then it becomes a solid. They even take liquid oils and partially hydrogenate them because bacteria can't recognize this form and therefore it doesn't go rancid. You see how they do it? Now, when it has been changed to a trans form, you cannot recognize it, and to you it is a foreign object. It's a plastic. You might as well cut up your plastic bucket and eat it on your bread. It's exactly the same thing. What is more, we need those molecules that we were speaking about now, those linoleics and linolenic acids and the arachidonic acids, the omega-3 ones. We need them to build prostaglandins. And prostaglandins are important in the immune system, in cancer prevention, in the blood system, platelet aggregation, all kinds of activities in the body. You're giving your body skew molecules to build very essential components. So when somebody gets cancer, we can pick it up often in the prostaglandins because one type is made more than another type. So what we have done chemically to the oils and the fats in the industry is horrendous. Yes, we might have reduced heart attacks, but I sincerely believe we have increased cancer. And I'll tell you what, if I had a choice, I'd rather go quickly. Really. Although even heart attacks, you can go slowly thereafter. So what is the way to go? The idea is, if you had to choose the oil now, what would you choose? You would choose a mono oil because it undergoes autooxidation 10,000 times slower than a polyunsaturated oil. So olive oil would be one. And how would you buy it? Cold pressed or heat extracted? Cold pressed. So that when you do make something like French fries, you would use olive oil. Now that's an overpowering taste. So what you do is you take your potatoes, you just drip a little bit of the olive oil over, you go chip, 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 you pop it in the oven, you bake it. By the time it gets out, it's just starting to make these free radicals. And you can eat it with a reasonable, not to worry about it to that extent. So don't deep fry and use it in that way, and you would be able to get away with it. But unextracted oil is still the best way to go, to make creams and sauces using the actual seeds. Then you can use the polyunsaturates, which you also need, because they come in the right quantity. You can make great sauces, great mayonnaises, great creams using natural components, and I'll tell you how to do that later. Fats generally are also bad news because they are solvents for many compounds. We import oils from different countries. You know, you have oils that in one season and you don't grow them in the other season. So we import, let's say, oils from Europe. They deliver it, and then that ship goes back with another load of something. You're not going to take oil back. There's no point in that, is there? So you put something like pesticides or whatever in, and you take that back. And then you put oil in again, and you take that back. And then these toxins accumulate. And so you had the perchloroethylene scare in Germany, all kinds of problems. You want to take components that mop up free radicals. And the idea today is, I don't want to change my lifestyle. Give me a tablet. Have you heard that? Just pop me a tablet. That's all I'm interested in. I want to eat bad, but give me a tablet. So the vitamin industry goes bananas. Vitamin pills fail to fend off cancer. This was an article of some of the research that was done. taking supplements of beta-carotene is not equivalent to eating a diet that is rich in fruit and vegetables. Studies demonstrate how hard it is to isolate a single component of a healthful diet as a beneficial element. They did studies with placebos and what they believed to be the antioxidant in foods like beta-carotene, and they found no study in the correct study nor in the Finnish study. The fact of the matter is that a healthy diet which includes vegetables and healthful food containing these compounds will do the trick, whereas the pill won't do it. So the way to go is to change your lifestyle. You have to start eating things that look like that. And let's face it, does that look bad? Does that look bad? Now, what is it in these foods that does it? Various plants have secondary compounds, just like you have defense compounds. So plants, particularly fruits and vegetables, have anti-carcinogenic compounds. And the wonderful thing is that in that plant, they play their role. So, for example, let's say cancer is produced by a carcinogen, goes to initiation. Then you need something to promote that cancer, let's say fat in the diet, and then you can get cancer. It can change your prostaglandins, oxidative damage, that's what we've talked about, those oils that we eat. What can prevent oxidative damage from affecting you so that you don't get cancer? Well, they found that carotenoids, phenolics, terpenes, tocopherols, the vitamin E group, and flavonoids can prevent it at that level. And let's say you're an older person, a female older person, and you have problems with steroid hormones. There are certain fibers, phytosteroids, which are steroid-like structures, particularly in legumes, particularly soybeans and things like that, which can help you overcome those problems. So depending on your problem, you could design a diet to actually help you beat or prevent cancer. And the wonderful thing is we know now which compounds occur in the various plants. So garlic, for example, is rich in sulfides. Now, not to be confused with the bad guys, these are elemental sulfurs, which are cleansers. It's rich in monoterpenes, triterpenes, and phenolic acids. Green tea has some of these compounds, but then, as you see, so do soybeans, grains, cruciferous, umbelliferous vegetables. That's the carrot family, and that's the cabbage family. The cabbage family is one of the great ones. Just look at that. It's got just about everything that is anti-carcinogenic. Funny, if it doesn't taste so good, it's good, right? Soybeans, actually, I like the cabbage family. Kids don't. Soybeans will have it. The carrot family is very, very good. And citrus is good. The tomatoes, eggplants, those sort of things. Cucurbitaceae, I just love these names. Scientists are such weird creatures. They think up the weirdest names. Anyway, that's the pumpkin type family. Licorice. Licorice tea tastes great. You only taste it after you've swallowed it, but never mind. Flaxseed. So these foods that I'm showing you now are high anti-cancer foods. Legumes. And that is the African diet. The African eats grains and legumes. They don't know cancer. Now they come into the city, they substitute that with all kinds of other garbage, and they're getting incredible rates of cancer and diseases. And we saw that they are more prone than the white because they're not subjected to this bad diet for that long period of time. And we're killing them. These people used to be happy. Just look at those smiles. By the way, this is the Malawi market. And just next to it, there's a meat market. Here they're all sitting like that. And on the meat market, they're sitting with palm leaves going like this. You know why? Every time they do that, it goes whoosh, whoosh, as the flies climb up into the air. Nuts, seeds, sprouts, garlic, cabbage family, umbelliferae, celery, parsley, all these things. Tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants, onions, pumpkin family, seeds. Wow, those are the anti-cancer foods. So if you have those in your diet regularly, And you don't go hopping down to the fast food store where you get nothing like that. You only get a refined bun, concentrated carcinogenic fat, and animal protein, and that's it. No wonder they're dying like flies. So to summarize it for you, high anti-cancer foods: garlic, cabbage, licorice, soybeans, and the umbelliferae. Medium would be your onions, your health teas, your herb teas, your citrus, and your rices and grains and tomatoes and eggplants and some of the broccolis and things. And moderate would be all your herbs and things like that. So there are ways to make sure that even in a bad environment, you can prevent disease. I just want to briefly run, I'm not going to go into great detail, into what else you can avoid. Remember, this lecture is called Your Health, Your Choice. But a choice always takes effort. When you go to a supermarket, that means you have to take the bottle off the shelf and look at it and read it. How many people do that? They go to the supermarket to buy, not to read. There are 8,000 additives listed by the World Health Organization. From anti-caking agents, anti-foaming agents, dyes, bleachers, bulking agents, stabilizers, gelling agents, packing agents, preservatives, you name it. And many of these cause food intolerance, toxic, immunological, immediate. Up to 20% of the populations of the Western societies are asthmatic. Dairy products, sulfate oxidize, and these products cause many of these ailments. We can improve our lifestyles by just cutting out some of these things. Here's the EC listing of what is permitted: colorants, preservatives, emulsifiers, thickeners, you name it, all the way down. Some of them used during the process, like aerating and anti-caking and color control agents and pH control and solvents. And then some are functional in the final products, like some of the artificial antioxidants and things which they use. Now, if you look at the symptoms, you will find that many of these problems, migraine, hyperactivity in kids, lethargy, sluggishness, no energy, photophobia, depression, irrational behaviors, feeling of unreality, irritability, dizziness, paranoid ideas, transient blindness, recurrent neuritis, blurred vision, Meniere's disease, hyperesthesia, neuralgia, insomnia, fatigue, nervousness, nervous tics, all of those are often just purely symptoms of food additives that people take. Little children often get seizures purely from a substance like MSG. And you can prevent it, and often it is interpreted as epilepsy. And when they do tests, they cannot find the epilepsy, but the kid has these symptoms. And often they want to remove portions of the brain to solve the problem if they could remove portions of the diet. Really, it is a very serious problem. MSG, for example, can cause general weakness, palpitations, numbness. Tension pains are the most common symptoms, this pulling in the neck. I have these pains in my back. Often by just changing the condiment that you use in your food, you can solve this problem. Headaches, sweating, and as I said, seizures. And then I have a pet hate, and that's the artificial antioxidants, like butylated hydroxytoluene and butylated hydroxyanisole. Those two guys are serious problems. By law, in most countries, the manufacturer just has to say antioxidant, but he doesn't have to specify which one. Now, you have vitamin E, that's tocopherol. That is a natural antioxidant. It's a ring structure with a tail, and it sits in the molecules and prevents oxidation, sits in the cell walls and prevents oxidation. Now, to make it more effective, in the artificial ones, they cut off the tail, which makes this thing circularize and move better within the cell membrane. But it causes havoc to other activities in the cell. There is evidence of carcinogenicity. There is evidence in rats that the enzymes which break down the component that transfers the impulse from one nerve to another is reduced greatly, which means that impulse, instead of being stopped, keeps on going. That's why you have kids going in class, and you can't do anything with them. And you'll find this on all the snack foods. And they will use these components. I have phoned the huge companies, and I have asked them, which antioxidant do they use? They will tell me they don't know. Then I will tell them, I'm terribly sorry, but by law, you must tell me if I ask you. Then they will say, we'll put you through to the chemist. Then they'll put you on hold for 3 hours. Eventually, you get through to the chemist, and he says he can't remember. Then you have to go through the same spiel again, and then eventually, he'll admit that it's either BHA or BHT. And you know what? There is just nothing you can do about it, except read what it says on the packet. And if it says contains no unnatural antioxidant or antioxidant tocopherol, vitamin E, or whatever, they make it very difficult. In Europe, they give it a code name, E400 and 372. And you have to go and get a book and look it up. What does that mean? You know, there's a plot out to destroy the mind state of the people. I'm getting a bit carried away maybe, but, you know, really this stuff irritates me. I will stand in front of a supermarket shelf, and I will call the manager, and I will ask him, excuse me, where's your soy sauce? And he'll say, but sir, it's right in front of you. I said, that's not soy sauce, this is toxic waste. Let me read it to you. Chick, 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 chick. You have different brands. There's this brand, that brand, this brand, that brand that doesn't have this garbage. Why do you only have garbage on your shelf? You know what? Next time you come there, the real stuff's there. If people were more aware, the companies would be for grape juice. You go and buy a grape juice, and it says preserved with sulfur dioxide, sodium benzoate, aspartame, you name it. And you say, I don't want this rubbish. Can I have a grape juice that has none of those in? It's just a little bit more careful in the process of making it. And there is one that has nothing in it. If people were to start buying only the one that has none of the garbage in it, we could solve this problem very, very quickly. I'll tell you, the industry responds. Colorants, hyperactivity, aggressiveness, allergic reaction, even anaphylactic shock. I had one family phone me once and say they've had their kids on every single drug that you can imagine, right down to the very worst kinds for hyperactivity, retinol, and all that stuff. And I said to them, why don't you just read the labels? They said, will you please come over? I went and visited them. These kids were impossible. I love kids, but these, wow. I'd live in the belfry, I'll tell you that. They were running and sliding under the seat, climbing over the top, and jumping on your lap. Disastrous for a male. To just be with them for 5 minutes will destroy your life. We went into the kitchen. I took all the drinks that the kids get to school every day. We analyzed them, took that stuff away. And 2 weeks later, the mother phones me, and she says, you know what? I've got new kids. I don't know them. Would you like to come and visit them? I said, give me another 2 weeks. Read the labels of what is on there. Sulfites that they use as preservatives. Asthmatic people should never use them. Sodium benzoate is the same basic formula as tartrazine. It is allergenic. It causes urticaria. People that are asthma prone should never, ever use it. If my wife drinks something, she inherited bad lungs because her mother smoked when she was expecting her. She's got the most rotten lungs in the world. She always has an asthma pump with her forever and ever, or else she will die. But since she's cut out all these things in dairy, she doesn't need an asthma pump anymore. That's a miracle. And if she ever gets some of this stuff in her, her lungs close up. The nitrites, radiation, well, we know that sugars are changed, the stereochemistry. But I want to talk about the general things. Vinegar. Let's talk about vinegar. Number one, it's toxic. It causes acidosis, and it is an amylase suppressor. Let's run through the process. Let's get logical. If you have something like grape juice, and it ferments, what does it produce? Alcohol, right? Now, we still have enzymes to deal with the alcohol. That's okay. And so do bacteria have enzymes to work through the alcohol bit. Finally, when the bacteria have finished the process and there's no more fermentation, what's left? Vinegar. Is there then any process further that the bacteria can do, yes or no? No. The bacteria have the same enzymes you and I have. They have the same enzymes, and if they can do nothing with the vinegar, then neither can you. In fact, we do have an enzyme that can eliminate and detoxify the vinegar, but it only occurs in the liver. So while this compound is in my food, and I put vinegar, let's say, on potatoes, being an amylase suppressor, what happens to the potato is that it changes color and odor by the time it gets out the back, and that's it. In other words, it's smelly, and you get rid of it, and it's no longer white but brown. That's it. You don't really digest it. So it's not a good idea to put vinegar on anything. Whereas if you put citric acid on, it's a very weak acid. We neutralize it instantly, and in fact, it is in the end alkaline forming. So citric acid, which occurs in lemon juice and in oranges and stuff, that's fine. So you could buy a ketchup, for example, that is made sour with citric acid, and I would say, okay, that's still all right. Buy that one. Or 99.9% of the brands will have acetic acid in it. What we have to do is retrain the companies. We have to tell them we don't want the one with acetic acid. We want the one with citric acid. Or better still, make your own with lemon juice. What's wrong with lemon juice? Why not put lemon juice over a salad? That'll solve the problem. So pickling and smoking of foods is also carcinogenic by the nitrates. So these foods are not healthy. You can pickle them in brine. You can pickle them in lemon juice. You can make great pickles, but why use vinegar? So by reading the labels, if you look at world stomach cancer, you will see that the countries that use lots of pickled and smoked foods have the highest incidence of stomach cancer. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. I beseech thee, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Nothing unreasonable about it. God has given us a bounty of foods to eat. And you know what? You don't have to miss out on anything. You just have to make a choice. Normally there are two things, one bad, one good. They taste just about the same. Why not choose the better one? Be not conformed to this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. It is possible to live a healthy lifestyle in an unhealthy world. You don't have to be a fanatic, and if you do occasionally eat things which are not just perfectly right, if your overall lifestyle contains all of those good things that we have talked about, you can get away with a lot without really transgressing anything. So let's try and make good choices so that we can have healthy minds and healthy bodies. Thank you very much.